Good morning, class, or good afternoon, whichever. Um, in this presentation, we are going to be talking about the music and the time known as the Renaissance, which lasted between 1450 and 1600 CE. And again, we know that CE means a common era. So let's delve right in, and I'm going to share my screen. Let's try that again. Sorry about that. Having a little technical difficulties. Okay, here we go. All right. All right. First of all, the Renaissance began around the year 1450 to 1600 and ended around 1600. Some guiding questions that we need to be concerned with. What is the difference between existing and living? And how does that pertain to the difference between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance? Let's think about that question for a second. Existing versus living. Existing is where you are just here, taking up space. You're surviving. Living is when you do things to make your existence more meaningful by engaging in things like art, music, the written word, things that we add to our existence to make it more meaningful, things that separates us from the animals. Now, how does that relate to the Renaissance versus the Middle Ages? Well, in the Middle Ages, pardon me, we were just surviving, trying to survive the bubonic plague, trying to survive the Crusades, trying to survive a rough style of living. In the Renaissance, civilization has progressed a little bit. There's some money left over to invest in the arts and the sciences. Okay. And so in the Renaissance, no longer are we just merely trying to survive. No, we're doing things like making music, making art. As is it any wonder that we have the great Renaissance artists, Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael, and others, um, carving out things like the statue of David or painting the Mona Lisa. So that's how it pertains. Our second question: why do you think the Renaissance begins in Italy? Well, think about what Italy is. Italy is a peninsula. It's surrounded by water on all sides. Anytime you have a port country, anytime you have a port country surrounded by water with a bunch of ports, you have a free flow of ideas, people, different cultures. And so Italy was a fertile ground for a renaissance, as it were, to occur. Okay. What was the Renaissance? Well, first of all, let's cover what Renaissance means. It's a French word meaning rebirth. A rebirth in what, you may ask? In the sciences, the arts, rhetoric, politics, philosophy, and exploration following the Middle Ages. And there was a renewed interest in these things that dated back to the Roman Empire, which came before the Middle Ages. And so there was a renewed interest in all of these things. We, as mentioned before, if you look at the map of the country of Italy and the Italian city states, we see that Italy is surrounded by water at every hand. And so, therefore, with all these cities that lie along the ocean or the sea, you have a mass flow of ideas, people coming in and out. There's a lot of commerce, there's a lot of culture being spread. And so, like I said before, Italy was fertile ground for a Renaissance to begin. Italy was a port country, and therefore a great deal of commercial activity commenced in Italy. These ports contain boats, which contain people with new ideas and customs. With all this new commerce, there was enough money left over, as we saw in the video, for people to invest in arts and culture. Huge point. Humanism, the study of all things human. There was a belief during the Renaissance that mankind was God's greatest creation and therefore deserved to be admired and studied. Therefore, we see that Renaissance art often contains the human body. It might be naked because, in its most perfect form, they believe that the human body was God's greatest creation. Studia Humanitatis. That's another word for humanism, the study of humans. Latin phrase. This idea, Studia Humanitatis, influenced every aspect of Renaissance art, music, and literature. We've already covered what is survival versus living. Survival is where you merely exist. Living is where we do things to make our survival more meaningful. And here in the picture, the illustration, we see someone painting something on a canvas. One of the reasons that the Renaissance occurred and the Catholic Church lost so much power is because the end of the Middle Ages. The end of the Middle Ages meant several things. It meant that the church lost a lot of its power. Remember, back during the Middle Ages, the church provided people with education, food, clothing, shelter, those things. Therefore, people relied on the church for a great deal. As the middle class grew and people did not need the church as much to survive, then the church lost a great deal of its power. The Reformation. The Reformation was began by Martin Luther in the year 1517, where he nailed 95 complaints or theses to the door of Wittenberg Castle, protesting the sale of indulgences by the Catholic Church. He viewed this as being corruption, and he urged people to break away from the Catholic Church, which I mean, let's face it, when you lose people, you lose their money and their support. And so the Catholic Church declined as a result. King Henry VIII. King Henry VIII took it a step farther and broke the whole country away from the Catholic Church. And we know the tainted story of King Henry VIII and his 5 or 6 wives that he had. He wanted to break away from the Catholic Church because the church would not grant an annulment to his marriage to Catherine. And so he broke away from the church and formed his own church, the Church of England, which almost verbatim mirrors the Catholic Church and its methods of worship, but it was a different church altogether, with not having the Pope as the head of the church, but rather having the king as the spiritual leader of the church. This was unheard of. Nevertheless, it happened, and the church lost a great deal of money and influence, particularly in the country of England. Okay, let's talk about the Renaissance art and artists. Basically, think about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, Michelangelo. They were named after uh, 4 great Renaissance artists. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael. Good Italian names. Leonardo da Vinci was an artist, inventor, and mathematician. He was not just an artist. And let's think about this for a second. What is a Renaissance man? A Renaissance man is someone who's pretty much good in everything they put their hand to. They are considered to be a Renaissance man, someone who is not just good at one thing, but good at many things. Michelangelo. Oh, by the way, if you look in this picture, this is a picture of the Mona Lisa, probably the most famous painting in all of Renaissance art. I'm sure we've all seen this at one time or another. Michelangelo, famous painter and sculptor. And we see in this picture the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Now, it took Michelangelo over 10 years to paint this. He was on a scaffold on his back, probably painting like this, painstaking, but nevertheless beautiful artwork, as only the Renaissance can produce. And if you'll notice, you see a lot of people in this painting. Again, going back to Studia Humanitatis, the study of humans. Even in religious works such as the Sistine Chapel, we try to look at the humanity of it. Donatello, famous for his bronze sculptures, as we see right here in this picture. Raphael, famous for his depictions of the baby Jesus with its mother, Mary, otherwise known as the Madonnas. A Madonna is simply a portrayal of Jesus Christ with his mother Mary. Now let's delve into the music of the Renaissance. There was a new emphasis placed on instrumental music because new instruments were being invented and older instruments were being updated. And here we see a picture of a Renaissance gentleman with a lute, which is like a Renaissance guitar. Now, what were lutes? Renaissance guitars with a wide oval belly. Viols, or as we like to call them today, violins, violas, cellos. But back then they were called viols. That's where we get the word violin or viola da gamba, and da gamba means leg. So the bigger instruments were held between the legs and you played like this, while the viols were played upright. All right, recorders. Recorders were made out of wood and they were flute like. So this is where we get flutes from, recorders. And again, we call them woodwind instruments because originally, before they were made out of metal, they were made out of wood. Brass instruments brass instruments have always been around, like the ram's horn, things like that, but now they've been updated. And so we get such things as the trombone or the sackbut or the trumpet. Keyboard instruments, such as the harpsichord, which is the father to the piano. And here we see an example of a harpsichord. Harpsichord, the strings are plucked rather than felt hammers hitting them, such as a piano. And the harpsichord plays relatively soft. And if you'll notice, the black and white keys are reversed. Renaissance vocal music came in two forms, the madrigal and the motet. The madrigal, what is the difference between the two? Simple. A madrigal is usually a secular song or worldly song, usually sung in the person's native language. A motet is usually a religious piece that is sung in Latin. During the Renaissance, we see the advent of something called polyphony, which is the employment of more than one musical line being performed at the same time, and yet somehow it fits together. This was the most significant musical innovation in the history of Western music. Let me say that again. Polyphony, or many sounds, is the most significant musical innovation in the history of Western music. Very important. Historical inventions during the Renaissance. The biggie, the printing press. The printing press led to the mass flow of ideas, music, and art because you could mass produce books, manuals, periodicals, newspapers, and we owe that all to Johannes Gutenberg, who invented the printing press. And that's all I have for you from this presentation. Okay, hope you learned a lot.